Hey, it's Millie, and welcome to the Generalist World podcast. This is a show where I interview people from the Generalist World community, and we talk things like the future of work, careers, predictions, their hot takes, and really understand what their squiggly careers have looked like. So if you're a generalist who feels like they're living in a specialized world, this is the podcast for you. Jitin,
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Yeah, not too bad.
We're here. We're in London. This is our very first live podcast. So thank you so much for being the brave soul who said, yes, 100%, I'll do it. Jitin, my first question for you is, when you're hanging out with your friends, how might they describe you?
I actually asked a few friends just before this podcast, and the results are always interesting because you don't expect it. The first one is I'm able to move between social circles quite easily, which I didn't expect. So that's the first thing. The other is the ability to move between very high concepts and then dive straight into the details and easily move between those. And the last is the ability to take very complex items and try and break it down into very simplified ideas that anybody can understand.
Yeah, okay. Because your kind of background, you're like, when I think of Jitin, I'm like, I link you to AI. I know there's been a real red thread through your career with AI. Tell us a little bit about that. What's your career look like? What's that growth look like for you?
I think I started out in defense tech, so I've got a computer science background. I think I was the guy that picked up the hand for all the difficult projects, and I think it was generally around curiosity. So when the really difficult projects came around and people were like, oh, who wants to do this? I'm like, me. And everybody else was looking at me weird. However, all these moments of curiosity actually led me to, for example, working on attack helicopters, sitting in a cockpit of an attack helicopter, which was really awesome, working in Cape Town for 3 months, and then taking the night shift. But then the positive part of that was actually looking at the sunrise, sitting on a rooftop and watching the sunrise, which was really amazing. So, yeah, curiosity always brought me along those paths.
And where do you think it comes from? Because I feel like maybe the majority of people aren't like, yes, give me the hard thing to do. Is that something that's always been in you?
I guess, yes. I've always looked at myself as a problem solver, always liked understanding puzzles and how things work and breaking things apart, which is probably not the best thing when you're small and you break all your toys, but and then try and put them together again, but it doesn't always work. But yes, curiosity has always been something that I was brought up with.
And what drew you to technology, or particularly AI?
So my father sort of was in the technology field, so brought up in that field, and I think he bought me this first computer, which was like 286, which was, I pretty much only could play Pac-Man on this. But yeah, it was the start of my career through computers. And then over the last few years, it's been AI as a thread. So moving through my career, I worked in consumer tech. So worked for Nokia, and people that remember that, Symbian OS. And curiosity there brought me into many different situations as well. Again, they gave this development board to my team and no documentation. And they said, who wants to do this? And I'm like, me, I'll take this. Everybody looked at me a bit strangely. But yeah, that getting that development board up and running got me a trip to Finland and then also to Paris, which was really great. So curiosity always seems to be or leads me into these very unique situations where I just learn a lot more.
And I mean, this is really operating in ambiguity, right? If they're like, there is nothing here you go. Like, what advice do you have for people? I imagine a lot of our listeners are probably like screaming, being like, yes, I completely resonate with this. Do you have any advice for people who are a little worried about all the ambiguity that is coming? How are you thinking about approaching quite an uncertain future?
That is a very good question. I think I'll give you an example. Recently joined a project, no idea about the background, and manager told me, it's okay, just go figure it out. We need someone to try and figure this out. And it's just listening to people, understanding all different aspects, understanding everybody, where everybody is coming from. Everybody has an opinion, just trying to understand that. And then you break down the facts from the ambiguity, and then you start moving forward. It's like, okay, these are the problems I need to fix. If I fix these problems, it unlocks the next stage, and then it just carries on. So trying to listen to everybody and just trying to be nice as well. So people tend to be a bit more open if you are nice to them. Sometimes you just have to be that psychologist and just listen to all the problems that they have and try and just spin out where the big problems are and the common threads across a project, for example.
I think it's such a common thing for a generalist to hear, which is just go figure it out. Like this like concept of like figure out ability, which is not a word, but I think is a thing that we can relate
Definitely.
to. How do you deal with, because often it's coming from the top down, right? It's leadership or management. It's someone above you being like, just go figure it out. How do you deal with like the communication or the process of actually figuring that out and like bringing a team along with you?
I think this is where breaking down concepts into an easy to understand form actually works. I've had great managers, so I've definitely had the ability to sound check with them, like who am I talking to, who's my audience, and then breaking those really complex things into a diagram. Picture speaks a million words, so just try and figure out how can you describe this in the most simplest way, and that somehow just brings everybody to the same level. So understanding problems, communicating those problems, and then also offering potential solutions, because your solutions may not be the greatest, but if you offer those solutions, you immediately find out what's wrong with them, and then you can tweak accordingly.
And when you are, I think that it's such a skill to be able to take something complex and break it down into simple terms. I think that's something not everyone has. Do you have any advice for people who want to get better at that?
I'll give you an example. So about a year ago, I was told the team had to move to cloud computing. And these are non-business users. They had no idea what cloud computing was. And I said, fine, I'll explain it to you, but tell me how you would like to explain it. And they said pizzas. I was like, all right, let's talk about pizzas as cloud computing. So, and we broke it down into saying, you don't own the pizza ovens anymore. Currently, you own all the pizza ovens and you're limited to this. Whereas if you go to cloud computing, as an example, you use someone else's pizza ovens. And if you want to scale out, you just use those pizza ovens for the time that you need it. And when you don't, you scale it down. It also gives you the ability to scale regionally. And I think that concept just clicked with a lot of people. I still get spoken about that every now and then. It's like, here's the pizza guy. So, yeah.
That's brilliant. So using analogies and using stories.
Yes, stories definitely works. I think the ability to do, especially with data, I see now more and more data becomes a important subject, and storytelling with data is, I think, critical moving forward.
What do you think people get wrong about that? If they're wanting to get better at storytelling through data, what are some like common pitfalls you might see people make?
I think bringing out the wrong concepts sometimes. So sometimes you look at data and you make assumptions around the data. And if you don't actually bring out those assumptions directly, I think people just assume that the data is correct, right? You do a pretty little Excel graph and that's the assumption that must be true. But you need to ensure that the data is correct from the get-go and then list out all the assumptions based on why this data is the way it is. There may be gaps in your data, state those things out. So it's just making sure that the audience that is looking at the final data set actually understand what this is, what it does have and what it doesn't have.
Super helpful. Okay. We've gone on a lovely little tangent around data and tech. That's fantastic. I want to come back to kind of your like overall career arc story, because from what I know of you, your story has not been a linear path. It has been really driven by this, like following your different curiosities, putting your hand up and saying, oh yeah, that sounds like a really hard thing to do. I'll take that on. Is there anything else from your career story that you'd like to share? Any other squiggles that might be helpful context for folks?
Yeah, so after Defense Tech, I joined Nokia Symbian, worked on some crazy projects there. And the interesting part is just having the human connections definitely plays out a lot. So An example is after I moved to the next company, the people that I got told to go to Seattle to sort of customer escalation, really high, really important customer. We need to sort this out. Walk into the meeting room and I meet the friend that I met in Paris a few years ago. Cup of coffee later, the escalation was sorted. So these human connections actually really play out. So just being kind to people is really critical, I think. You never know when the world is a small place, you're always going to bump into someone again. After the whole Nokia thing, I remember that moment where the Nokia CEOs dismissed the iPhone as Apple doesn't do any iPhones, they don't do PCs. We know how that landed up. At that point in time, the entire Cambridge site got laid off. Now, me being young at that age was, I got money. I've got 3 months off to do something really cool. And I traveled for about 6 weeks across South America, so Brazil, Cuba, Mexico. And it was amazing, absolutely amazing. But that actually unlocked something for me around travel being this reset for me. So very stressed out, very annoyed with a lot of things, go traveling. It forms this reset. Came back extremely calm, collected, and ready for the next adventure. And then I ended up in a company that does GPUs. So that's, I guess, where my AI part started. And we did all consumer electronics. So everything from smartphones to smart watches, and then also complex things like drones and high-speed cameras. So just the variety of things, even like a Mini Cooper. I got told to go to Germany one day to sort things out for a Mini Cooper, which, again, you wouldn't think about, but it's got a screen, so definitely. And so the complexity across that was quite interesting. And the reason I really enjoyed it is no project was the same. And I think over time, I think I just reached this point where I burnt out. And when I did a bit of a self-reflection, I had been a manager for about 5 years, had like a global team of 23 or something. And I think I just realized I don't want to be a manager anymore. And this was the requirement from the traditional career path that you start off as a software developer, you do a few things, you become a manager, and then you just scale out. And I didn't like that. And I think at that point in time, being burnt out, tried to do a few interviews, didn't go very well because brain wasn't in the right space. And I remember a very particular moment where I came back from Korea, from a customer trip, packed my bags, and on the same night traveled to South Africa for a surprise birthday party. And my parents looked at me and the first thing is like, what is wrong with you? Like, no, I'm fine. And they said, no, you're not. And then I told them, look, I'm trying to find a new job. It's very difficult. And they gave very simple but very profound outlook, which is, what is the worst thing that can happen? And I stared at them and they're like, you come back home. And I think staring that fear direct on, it just lost all that power that it had. You put a name to it and suddenly it's, that is true. If I quit my job, if nothing works out, I just come back home. And that simple statement just gave me a lot of clarity. Came back and I quit my job a week later. And then I did another backpacking trip because by this time I realized travel is definitely something that just clears out the mind, sets you in the right direction. And from a trip to Southeast Asia for about 2 months, then went back home because my niece was just born. So I had time to spend with my niece, and not being employed was actually a great thing at that point because I got to spend a lot of time instead of just take a particular time off and you have these leave days and you need to fit things in a leave day. And so I got time to actually spread out again and become myself again. And clarity was, at that point in time, it was exactly clear on what I wanted to do. So going to cloud computing, do something that's good for mankind, humankind, and also do something meaningful. Then I ended up in this really crazy health tech, very chaotic. So chaotic that I think a few months in, I actually hired someone And 2 hours later, they walked out because it was too chaotic for them.
Wow.
That's how crazy this environment
2
was.
hours.
2 hours.
Quick turnaround.
So it was quite an interesting place
What
to
did
work.
that feel like? Because at the time, did you realize it was chaotic, or were you just in it?
So again, the great manager that I had at that point in time, the interview was amazing for that role. I had been through a machine learning interview and then a technical interview, and then finally met my manager at that point. And the manager looks at me and is like, I like you. I'm like, okay. It's like, can you see out the door? And we had this massive glass screen. It's like, it's total craziness out there. Can you help me? I'm your man.
I like hard things.
I like
that no
I
one
like
else wants to
chaotic,
do.
chaotic situations. That's my
Yeah.
groove. Yeah. And that's essentially how I joined that team. And I think while it was chaotic, I really enjoyed working there because the diversity of people that I worked with, the skill set that I built up, it was really a generalist, playground, because I got to work with, epidemiologists, clinicians, doctors, machine learning and researchers, engineers, product, go-to-market, legal, compliance. It was just amazing and really great people, all directed to that mission. So it just shows if the mission is there, you bring this amazing group of people together and it just somehow works out. So even in chaotic situations, there is definitely some light and definitely something you can learn from there.
Yeah. And while the chaotic situations might not be for everyone, sometimes for generalists, this kind of environment where you do have, particularly I think it has to be a perfect storm of having some quite amount of like autonomy or freedom. Otherwise, it's like you're in chaos and you can't impact it.
And that is exactly where managers help out and senior leadership. I mean, I worked very closely with the CTO at the time as well. And she gave me the space to work. And she said, you know what you're doing. Figure it out. Just tell me what you'd like to do and I'll try and help you along the way. So having that buy-in from leadership definitely helps out.
Yeah, that's a great kind of tangent. If managers are listening to this and they see that they have generalists on their team and they see that it's this like quite chaotic or ambiguous environment, what are kind of some tactical things that they can do to support people in this environment?
I think just tell them that they're doing an amazing job. I think a lot of times managers assume that a generalist knows what they're doing right. And as a generalist, like, this is just my day job. It's like, I handle chaos, that's fine. But actually explicitly telling a person, you know what, this is a completely crazy situation and it's amazing how you're handling it. That just reinforces that, yes, it's fine. It's okay being a generalist. It's okay, being in this chaotic situation, but you're still doing an amazing job. So go ahead. We know that there's light at the end of the tunnel and you leading us to that path. So go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I think it's recognition, right? It's recognizing the value. I think I speak to a lot of generalists, and this is often sometimes something that is overlooked. People feel overlooked or they feel undervalued, and they're like, I know I'm doing all this amazing work, but people aren't recognizing it, or they're getting I'm not getting paid for what I'm doing. I'm not getting paid for all these dots that I'm connecting, or I'm holding this together. So I think it's great advice. Just be really explicit.
Yeah.
Name it.
Yeah, name it. Exactly.
I want to know about your take. You have an interesting link of LLMs and generalists.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So when LLMs actually came out, I was trying to build up an analogy. I think maybe taking a step back. Previously, a lot of machine learning algorithms are very specialized. You give it a particular data set, it runs a particular algorithm, and it does amazing at that. It's very great at what it does. I think LLMs actually flipped the script on this for the simple reason it's taken this foundational knowledge of all human knowledge, essentially, that's available, and built this foundation. This is essentially what the LLM is, which is why you can ask it about anything and it will probably know about it. So very generalist by nature. But then you have the ability to, say, for example, on Claude or GPT, you OpenAI, just putting an extra PDF on it or a screenshot, you've just added extra context to it. And that's exactly what generalists do, right? We have this baseline knowledge And then you add on this extra bit, we understand it, and then we use this foundational knowledge to actually extract value out of this additional context that you have. So I definitely think that LLMs are very generalist by nature, I think. And the way that it works is, I think, really great. So.
And you know what you just did is you took a really complex topic and you just explained it simply using an analogy and a story. So that's a great example in action. That's amazing. Let's talk about predictions. You have an interesting vantage point because you are in this world of technology. You're a product manager. You are deep also in understanding. You probably have a deeper understanding than most about AI. What are some of your predictions for the next, say, 12 months?
I think over the next 12 months, there's a lot of hype at the moment around AI. There's a lot of POCs. There's a lot of let's try this out. I don't think there's any value add right now. It's a lot of, we could do this, but we're not sure how it would be scaling out. Is it viable as a long-term solution? I think over the next year, a lot of those will become solidified. So we'll have a clear understanding of what is possible, what's not. I do think it will be, we just at the tipping point right now. So over the next few years, guarantee that there'll be some new amazing things. But at the same time, if you think about it, unlocking your phone with your face a few years ago was something amazing, right? Now it's just normal. I think over the next few years, AI will just become normal. It'll just become part of the way we live. Yeah, that's my prediction. So I definitely think over the next year, there'll be new concepts that arise. We'll definitely go in a different direction to what we are now. But at the same time, it just becomes normal after a while. There's hundreds of models being created. There's so much research being done. I think at some point it will converge.
On the optimism to pessimism spectrum, where do you fall? Do you think AI is ultimately going to be a good thing for humanity and the way that we work and the way that we live? Or are you concerned?
Funny enough, I just seen a small short from Cassie, really great data scientist of Google. And she said that AI's work is never done for the simple reason there's always going to be problems to solve, whether there's diseases to try and mend or problems with humankind. We will always have a requirement for AI, and AI just brings us slightly closer. There will be a lot of chaos, but same thing with the Industrial Revolution, right? At some point, we will, as humans, just normalize and figure things out.
Yeah, and I think this is where the generalist skill set, it's the ambiguity, it's the adaptability, it's the figure it out ability, which is now going to maybe be the title of this podcast, figure it out ability. I would kind of like to end on understanding and hearing a bit more about your generalist world experience. You've been with us since the very early days, the OG days, when I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but there's some great people around me. How has being a part of GW shifted things in your life?
I think I joined GW at a time when I was going through a bit of an interesting manager situation. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, I realized, or I was going through this whole thing of, is being a specialist really something I should do? It's like being a generalist really what people want me to do, because the manager at that time assumed that I should be fitting into this box. And if you don't fit into a box in a corporate structure, it's like, well, what do you do? And I didn't want to do management because I knew that I preferred mentorship over management. I knew that I still wanted to be close to tech, so still be an individual contributor at that point in time. And all of these things which made me very generalist was playing against me because I didn't fit into a box that the manager assumed. And I found GW. I think within the first month, it was amazing. I had my first hot seat. And I realized that it's normal. It's okay being generalist. It's like there's so many other people out there with all these squiggly parts, and there's nothing wrong with me. And it just normalized the entire situation. I remember having a hot seat and having people, probably the most organized hot seat I've ever had to do, try to state my problem and where I am and what I need from the community. And I got very good feedback. And it completely flipped the mindset of how I think of my career. I think it's not a bug, it's a feature, but it also becomes a filter of what I want to do. And soon after that hot seat, I got offered an opportunity where they created an opportunity for me around my skill set. They were like, here's a problem. We have no idea how to deal with it. Figure it out. And yeah, I had to use a broad set of skills to actually go into this role and try and get it to a stable point. So I'm very grateful for the entire GW community. And it's been great ever since then. I think it's just been one of those communities where you just feel normal and it just keeps on giving. And I've met so many amazing people along the way, including you.
And you're famously, whenever we have a GW event, one of the last people to leave.
Yes.
You hold that
sometimes
title.
by choice, sometimes not by choice.
Well, this has been amazing. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would really like to talk about while you have the mic?
No, but I do think going through this entire journey, preparing for the podcast, was quite interesting. And I'd actually get listeners to think about their entire journey and see what their red thread is. You know, how do things fit together? Because you'll be surprised at how connected everything is. So take the opportunity, try and figure out how your life connects and how your journey fits together.
Amazing. Jeetan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.